So when I first started in this sector 25 years ago, the demand for data was really close to nil. When they asked us to do this kind of work, it was really around satisfying a funder requirement. And if the funders asked us to do it, it was really about, they had already made a decision that they were going to cut a program, and they were just looking to stand behind something that said, oh, this program isn't working. You know, sometimes we sit with funders and grantees together, and there's a really robust conversation around evaluation and around learning. And then in the end of the day, the grantee says to the funder, well, what do you want us to evaluate, right? And the funder's saying, well, you know, what's going to be helpful to you? What's going to help you guys learn? What's going to help you improve? What's going to help you, you know, fill in the blank? And so there is a little bit of a, you know, still, you know, question of you know, what kinds of data, for whom, for what, toward what ends, for what purposes. I will say that, you know, there are definitely some organizational leaders in the Jewish communal space that are really, you know, doing great work.
What was the timeline like between funder interest in data and grantee follow-up interest in data?
Oh, I see what you're saying. You know, it's hard to say. I mean, it's hard to say if the funders hadn't have done it, like, you know, would the organization sort of be where they are today? I think that it's primarily been driven by the funders, but not in the way that it used to be driven by the funders. That's the whole point. I mean, it's a categorically different conversation now, right? It used to be that the funders would say, you have to evaluate this, and we need a report card, and we need to know whether we're going to cut our funding or not. Now the funders are saying, we really value learning, we value continuous improvement, we sort of value all these things, and we know that we have to do that with you.
Is it true that as kind of time passes and as there's more discussion of data and like the possibilities of how data can be used, that like funders and grantees understand the use of data in a much more expansive way, like as less of a report card thing and more of
absolutely
like a tool
absolutely.
That they can use in improving like
absolutely.
philanthropy and improving program
practice.
Provision.
Absolutely, 100%.
Have you seen changes in program provision over time that you think is due to this attention?
No, I've
data?
definitely seen direct results of, you know, the work that we've done and the work that others have done in this space, for sure.
So those are some of the opportunities. What are some of the challenges?
Too much of anything is too much, right? I mean, it's, you know, moderation. When and how and with what tools to, you know, to do that kind of work. You know, sometimes we get asked to, you know, evaluate projects, and I feel like it's like shooting a mouse with an elephant gun. I mean, it's just not necessary to go to X level or Y detail. Or the requests that are being made of grantees now to, you know, gather these data and report on these things. If, you know, the piece that I'm concerned about, you know, sort of going overboard in the other direction is if you can't answer the fundamental question of what are you going to do with those data if you're able to get them and once you have them, if you can't answer that question in a compelling way, don't bother. Don't spend the resources. Don't take the time. Don't spend the money. That's critical. Utilization is really what it's all about.
On the opposite side, do you find that the rising interest in data creates a distance between expectation of what can be done and a limitation of what really can be done with data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, there are definitely some pretty sophisticated, you know, program providers and funders who understand both the limitations and the possibilities. But I think it's like anything else. I mean, if it's the hot new topic and the shiny new thing, everybody wants to be involved, or everybody wants a piece of it. They don't necessarily understand all the nuances of it. And that's one of the things that becomes very difficult, because then everybody thinks, oh, you know, well, if we could just get the answer to this question, we would then know X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C. And it's not always that straightforward, mm-hmm. right? It's very difficult to establish causation. You know, it's very difficult to you know, get, you know, the level of precision or the particular details that people are looking for. And some of that is just, what's feasible and what we're capable of doing, and some of it is just the limits of social science.
How does that shape our role as evaluators and our relationship with both funders and grantees, that we may be playing a larger educational role in the possibilities and limitations of the use of data?
We find ourselves, I find myself every single day facilitating conversation. And it's constant. So I say, the devil's in the details, and people, really coming to understand what's possible, and what's realistic, and what's going to be helpful in the end of the day. That's the critical piece.
Sometimes beforehand, I'm learning that you can say something is not possible. A client will request that you look into X or Y, and someone will say, can we understand what caused this? That is something beforehand we can say, actually, based off of the financials and our resources, that is not something that we can do. The difficulty comes afterward, when there are things...
Is it always just financial? Is it always just about resources available? Sometimes it's actually about what the data can and can't.
Right, but I'm saying beforehand, theoretically, if somebody wants to talk about cause, if you had unlimited resources and unlimited times, you could look into the causation.
And unlimited comparison groups, which we don't have because we
course.
don't run experiments.
Of
All those things those are the limitations. That's the world we live in. We don't live in a world of we're going to take, these 50 people and they're going to go on this Israel trip, and these 50 people that look mostly like these 50, and we're going to say, no, you can't go on this trip, so that we have a comparison group, right? What we're dealing with is the practical exigencies of programs that are actually moving and being funded and being run, and those things oftentimes don't exist in the universe that we're that we're looking at.
And it's easier when these realizations happen beforehand versus afterwards. Sometimes you expect to be able to make a certain conclusion or look at a certain comparison, and you can't based off of the data you have. And sometimes you collect data, quantitative data, that answers the research questions that you have, and then after you collect it, you present it, and you realize, wait, there are follow-up questions. But then you can't answer those follow-up questions because you designed the entire data collection based off of this initial process and these initial questions.
The question is, do some clients value qualitative data more than quantitative data, or vice versa? And the bottom line is, it depends. Also, certain questions don't lend themselves to quantitative data, and certain questions don't lend themselves to qualitative data. So part of our work as sort of experts and people who do this on a regular basis is to be able to not just framing specific questions like on a questionnaire or on a survey or something like that, but the evaluation questions, the big questions that are being asked, the research questions that are driving a particular project. We have to be able to articulate them in ways where then it's clear what methods we would use to actually answer those questions. And in some cases, mixed methods are appropriate. In some cases, qualitative is more appropriate. In some cases, quantitative is more appropriate. And that's another thing that we have to really educate our clients around is what are the most appropriate methods to answer the questions that they have, and then what's possible given the population, given the program, given the timing, given the resources, and all of those things come into play when we're making decisions about what data are gettable, knowable, translatable, and applicable. Over time, our field has been lilting or tilting toward a more quantitative orientation. And I think that's because so much of the early evaluation work that was done in this sector was all qualitative. And there's been a sort of a reaction to that. For the most part, I think most of our work is pretty balanced, and I think we bring the right methods to bear on the questions. But there's definitely a little bit of a tilt right now.
What I have noticed, and I'm curious how you would relate to that, is that many times a client will focus on, let's say, the quantitative data. Sometimes the same is true for qualitative data. And they really want to focus on a survey, and they want to focus on the numbers, and they need the numbers
Yep.
to draw the conclusions. And then we get to the end, we present
Right.
the
And then
quantitative
they wanna
data,
understand-
and they want to understand, oh, well, who are these people? Or they said they found a certain session to be extremely valuable. What about it was valuable?
Exactly.
What would the impact?
Right.
And you realize that, and afterward, they realize, wait, we need that qualitative data as well, because this only tells a certain part of the story.
A lot of times people expect quantitative data to tell its own story when all quantitative data needs to be interpreted. And we are very careful about the way we report quantitative findings. So we're important not to use language that imputes causality where we can't actually prove any causality and stuff like that. But the desire for a story requires a level of interpretation. There's all kinds of missing pieces to the story. And so we don't actually have a story yet.
Some of the work that we do here, or included in many of the projects that we're on, is building capacity within our clients. Mm-hmm. As interest in data increases and we do work to build capacity, how do you find a firm like this, mainly focused on evaluation, both existing and interacting with clients who we've worked with to build their own internal capacity?
Yeah, look, in the end of the day, there's only so much that an organization can, I mean, any organization that's devoted to like its content and its constituency, it's not going to develop, this huge like evaluation capacity or this evaluation capacity muscle. As some of these folks with whom we've been working, on, consistently year after year, and their sophistication has, evolved in terms of the kinds of questions they're asking and the kinds of work they're asking us to do on their behalf. So has their ability to, take what we give them and actually really use that to, enhance and improve and expand, and deepen the impact of their work, for sure.
I think for us as evaluators, it's really important to hold our line on integrity around data and just make sure that that is like the first priority, and to continue educating clients in a way that supports that kind of integrity. And it's exciting to hear about the changes that have happened so far as like awareness and understanding of data and sort of the scientific method become more generally like understood and accepted. There seems a lot like it'll be easier to hold that ground of integrity around data.
I see that the view of data as a whole is going to be less localized within organizations. Many times right now we see our touch point at an organization, from my perspective, is one or two people who are A, responsible for the evaluation and the funding, and B, some of the more data-driven individuals who have a greater understanding of data. And sometimes it is left to them to disseminate the story and the findings to other people. And I see, as the people who are coming in start their work in these organizations with data from the get-go, that in the future, 5, 10, 15 years, since everyone from now is going to start with data, that these organizations will be as a whole more data-driven and more, as a whole, understanding of the work we do.
That's, that would be the big payoff. The big payoff would be is that, as new professionals come into the field, as young professionals come into the field, that, just part of their onboarding, part of their training, part of their pre-service training, their in-service training is reading these reports, learning from what's been produced, over this last 10 to 15 years that this work has really started to, gain traction in the sector. And that it's a foregone conclusion, that becomes the starting point.